The discovery was supposed to end the mystery, but instead it deepened it. Astronomers staring at the data from 3I Atlas expected the usual story of a solitary comet drifting through our solar system, a single visitor from interstellar space, strange in its chemistry but alone, a wanderer without companions. But as it drew closer to Mars, something unprecedented began to unfold. New objects began appearing around it, dim smudges at first, faint points of light at the edge of detection, so subtle they could be dismissed as noise. But the longer telescopes tracked, the clearer the truth became. 3I Atlas was not alone, it was multiplying. At first, the assumption was fragmentation. Comets break apart all the time, especially when they approach a star. The heat of the sun cracks their icy surfaces. Jets of gas rip them into pieces, and clouds of dust trail behind. But the pieces of 3I Atlas behaved differently. They were not random shards spinning in chaotic arcs. They were steady, consistent, moving with a strange precision that fragments should not possess. It was as though they were being placed, arranged, positioned with purpose. This was the moment when unease spread across observatories worldwide. Because if 3I Atlas was truly fragmenting, the story would be one of natural disaster, a threat to Mars or even Earth if the debris paths intersected. But if the objects were not fragments, if they were independent, then the story changed entirely. Then it was no longer just a comet. It was a convoy, a fleet, a gathering of something no one had prepared to see. Imagine standing outside on a clear night. Above, the emerald glow of 3I Atlas dominates the sky, its tail stretching across constellations. To the naked eye, it is beautiful, mesmerizing, a wonder of the heavens. But hidden in that glow are companions, dozens of faint objects, clustered tightly, some trailing just behind, others drifting outward. Each night, more are detected. Each night, the swarm grows thicker. The comet is no longer a single visitor. It is becoming a presence. The first theories were cautious. Some suggested dust clouds condensing into clumps, creating the illusion of discrete objects. Others argued that faint asteroids, long hidden in the dark, were being illuminated by the comet's outgassing. But none of these theories survived scrutiny. The motion of the objects was too precise, their brightness too steady. Natural debris tumbles, fragments drift, brightness fluctuates. These companions did none of that. They moved in formation. Formation. That was the word no one wanted to use, because once it was spoken, the implications became unavoidable. If the companions of 3I Atlas were in formation, then they were behaving like something under control. And if they were under control, then someone, or something, was controlling them. The thought echoed in whispers across conference calls and encrypted emails. What if these are not fragments at all? What if they are machines? From Earth, the view is deceptive. Telescopes show only faint smudges. To the public, nothing appears unusual. Official statements remain calm, insisting that no threat exists, that the comet remains a natural object behaving within expected parameters. But in the background, defense agencies scramble. Military satellites are reoriented. Radar arrays shift to new frequencies. Signals are tested against the swarm, probing for responses. Silence follows, but silence in this case is not comforting. Silence feels like patience. The eerie part is the timing. The swarm began to grow just as 3I Atlas approached Mars, as though proximity to the red planet triggered something, activated something. One day, a solitary green comet drifted in silence. The next, it was accompanied by a growing cloud of companions. What changed? Why Mars? Was the maneuver beside the planet not enough of a warning? Was this the second act? The moment when the visitor revealed that it was not alone? For scientists, the data is maddening. The objects are too small to resolve clearly, yet too orderly to dismiss. They could be probes, scouts, sensors, or fragments carrying unknown chemistries. Each possibility raises more questions than it answers. What are they made of? Why are they multiplying now? And most of all, what are they doing? For the public, ignorance remains. The sky still glows green, beautiful and strange. People take photographs, share them online, marvel at the cosmic spectacle. Few know that hidden in the glow are companions, faint and silent, multiplying as each night passes. Few know that the comet they admire may not be a comet at all. But for those who do know, the fear grows. Because if 3I Atlas is multiplying, then the question is not whether it is natural or artificial. The question is what comes next. Do the companions continue to grow in number until they form a swarm too large to ignore? Do they detach from the comet and take up positions around Mars, as though claiming the planet for themselves? Or do they turn toward Earth, carrying with them the same precision, the same unnatural silence, the same impossible glow. The thought no one speaks is the most terrifying of all. What if the multiplication is only the beginning? What if 3i Atlas is seeding the solar system, releasing objects not meant to drift, but meant to stay, meant to wait, meant to spread? What if we are watching not a comet's death, but the birth of something far larger? The green light grows brighter, the swarm grows thicker, and as 3i Atlas approaches Mars, the truth becomes harder to deny. Something is happening out there, something no one can explain, something that may change the fate of 2 worlds, and perhaps the entire solar system. Stay with me, because in part 2, we will examine the swarm more closely, diving into the data that reveals how the companions move, what they might be made of, and why their formation may be the most terrifying clue of all. The first time the swarm was noticed, most of the data analysts thought it was a glitch. Survey telescopes are sensitive, and the further out an object lies, the easier it is for noise to masquerade as discovery, a cosmic ray striking a sensor, a reflection, a processing error. But as images were checked, frame by frame, night by night, the pattern refused to vanish. Around 3i Atlas, dim points appeared where none should be. When the comet moved, the points moved with it. When its brightness pulsed, they seemed to shimmer in response. It was no error. It was real. Astronomers are trained to be skeptical. They know how often the universe tricks us. They know how easy it is to mistake noise for signal, coincidence for pattern. But the more data arrived, the harder it became to dismiss. The companions did not wander randomly. They did not tumble away into space as natural fragments would. They stayed close, hovering in orbits that defied chaos. Natural fragments scatter. They spin, wobble, flare bright, then fade. But the companions of 3i Atlas showed none of that. Their light curves were steady. Their positions relative to the comet were consistent. Some drifted outward, but at a controlled pace, as though each one was being placed in a deliberate orbit around the main body. To those who studied the trajectories, the effect was unmistakable. The swarm behaved like a constellation of satellites. That single word, satellites, was enough to split the scientific community in two. To use it meant admitting that something artificial might be unfolding. Some clung desperately to natural explanations. Perhaps volatile jets of gas were firing at just the right intervals to nudge fragments into stable paths. Perhaps static charges were binding debris into clusters. Perhaps the physics was stranger than we realized. But even those arguments sounded weak. They required coincidence upon coincidence, a cascade of unlikelihoods piled so high they collapsed under their own weight. Meanwhile, defense agencies were less restrained. To them, precision meant control. Control meant design, and design meant intelligence. The swarm was no longer just a curiosity, it was a potential threat. In simulation rooms, supercomputers modeled the swarm's growth. The results were unsettling. If the current rate continued, within months there would be hundreds of companions, each stable, each orbiting within a radius that suggested coordination. Some clustered tightly, others drifted outward like sentinels. The pattern resembled a net being cast across space, a structure slowly unfolding beside Mars. And then came the strangest part of all, the resonance. When astronomers analyzed the light from the companions, they found subtle pulses buried in the glow. Not random flares, not chaotic bursts, but rhythmic signals, repeating at intervals that seemed almost deliberate. To the cautious, it was dismissed as interaction between sunlight and gas jets. But to others, it looked like modulation, like the simplest form of communication, as though the swarm was not just orbiting, but signaling. Imagine what this looks like from Earth. A comet that should be solitary now trails a growing cloud of faint objects, each one pulsing with a strange green shimmer. To the naked eye, it still appears beautiful, mesmerizing, a single emerald light. But through telescopes, it reveals a hidden geometry. The comet is the anchor, the swarm is the pattern. Together they move like a system, not a rock. What are these companions? The theories multiply as quickly as the objects themselves. Some suggest they are probes, released one by one, each with its own purpose. Scouts to map the solar system, sensors to gather data, seeds to linger behind. Others argue they could be defensive, like drones orbiting a mothership, ensuring its safety as it approaches Mars. A few, the most cautious, whisper that they could be weapons. Not in the sense we know, but in a way more subtle. Machines waiting for the right signal, the right trigger, the right moment to act. But the most haunting possibility is that this is not the first time that other comets we once thought were natural, visitors catalogued as icy wanderers, may have hidden swarms of their own, that our ancestors may have seen glowing lights multiply in the sky, recorded them as omens, and passed the memory down as myth. If so, then 3i Atlas is not unique. It is only the latest to reveal itself. Governments remain silent, but silence is its own kind of confession. Independent astronomers plead for transparency, demanding that data on the companions be released to the public. But official channels insist the anomalies are natural. Natural fragments, natural scattering, natural light. Behind the curtain, however, satellites are repositioned, new missions are quietly drafted, and emergency protocols are dusted off. No one admits the truth aloud, but everyone feels it pressing down. This is not natural. This is not random. The companions continue to multiply. Each week, new objects appear, faint at first, then steady. Each one slips into orbit like a bead on a string, spacing itself with uncanny precision. Each one moves as though guided, as though following instructions written in mathematics we do not yet understand. And as Mars grows closer, as 3i Atlas drifts beside it, the swarm thickens. Soon, the red planet will be surrounded by a halo of companions, a net woven in emerald light. What they are, no one knows. What they want, no one dares to say. But one truth has become impossible to deny. 3i Atlas is not a comet. It is something more, and whatever it is not alone. Stay with me, because in part 3, we will push deeper into the data, exploring not just how the swarm moves, but how it seems to respond, pulses, resonances, and the chilling possibility that it is already listening. At first, the pulses were dismissed. A quirk of the data, a glitch in the processing, a coincidence of sunlight striking gases at just the right angle. But as the swarm around 3i Atlas multiplied, the pulses multiplied too. Regular, rhythmic, repeating at intervals that seemed too precise for chaos. Faint at first, then clearer as more companions appeared, until the glow of the comet itself seemed alive with resonance. Light is easy to misinterpret. Stars flicker, atmospheres distort, instruments falter. But across observatories in Chile, Hawaii, Spain, and beyond, the same patterns emerged. A sequence of rises and falls, faint modulations buried in the comet's green shimmer, patterns that persisted night after night, patterns that repeated when the comet turned its face toward Mars. No one wanted to say it outright, but the word lingered in every private conversation. Communication. Not in the sense of words or language, but in the universal grammar of rhythm and repetition. Nature is chaotic, physics is noisy, but intelligence leaves fingerprints in order. And the swarm was nothing if not orderly. The question became unavoidable. Was 3i Atlas not just multiplying, but speaking? Governments acted faster than they admitted. Deep space antennas were retasked. Their dishes turned not toward distant pulsars or galaxies, but toward the emerald glow beside Mars. Short bursts of radio frequencies were transmitted quietly, hidden from the public under the guise of calibration tests. Each transmission was followed by silence, a silence that stretched like a held breath. And then, on some frequencies, something happened. Not a reply in words, not a message in any sense we understand, but a shift, a faint change in the resonance of the swarm, as though it had noticed, as though it had turned an ear toward us. For some, it was coincidence. For others, it was confirmation. We were not just watching 3i Atlas. It was watching us. The implications were staggering. If the swarm could respond, then it was not debris. It was not fragments. It was a system capable of awareness, of reaction, perhaps even of intent. And the thought that froze everyone who heard the data was simple. If it can hear us, then it already knows we are here. Astronomers debated endlessly. Some argued the pulses were natural harmonics, the product of volatile jets firing in sequence. Others pointed out that no comet had ever displayed such precision, such regularity, such apparent responsiveness. The data split the community into camps. Skeptics clinging to physics, believers whispering about probes. But even the skeptics could not explain the timing. Why did the pulses intensify whenever Mars came into alignment? Why did they falter, then return, as though synchronizing with something unseen? And what of the multiplication itself? Each new object that appeared around 3i Atlas joined the resonance, contributing to the chorus. The swarm was not just growing, it was harmonizing. A cluster of faint green satellites orbiting a comet, pulsing in rhythm, forming a symphony of signals no natural process could easily explain. Imagine standing on Mars. Above, the sky glows with emerald fire. Not a single comet, but dozens, perhaps hundreds of companions swirling in formation, each one shimmering faintly, pulsing at intervals, as though the heavens themselves were breathing. The red planet bathed in alien rhythm, a silent music carried on light. That is what our instruments are seeing. That is what no one dares to tell the public. The fear is not just that it is communication. The fear is that it is coordination. If the swarm is a system, then the pulses may be more than signals. They may be instructions, commands issued across companions, synchronizing their behavior, guiding their orbits, preparing them for whatever comes next. What if we are not intercepting a message meant for us, but internal chatter, machine language bouncing between drones, each pulse a heartbeat in a network older than our species? The thought chills even the boldest researchers. Because if that is true, then we are not the recipients of communication. We are eavesdroppers, listening to something not meant for us, overhearing a system that may not care we exist at all. And if it does care, if it knows we are listening, then the consequences could be worse. Defense circles now wrestle with a question no one wants to ask publicly. Should we respond again? Should we transmit louder, clearer, risking a reply that might not be friendly? Or should we stay silent, pretend ignorance, hope that the swarm loses interest? There is no consensus. Some argue silence is safest. Others argue that silence is impossible, because by now our radio emissions, our radar pings, our every broadcast have already betrayed us. If 3i Atlas is listening, it already knows who we are. Meanwhile, the public remains entranced by the comet's glow, unaware of the growing swarm hidden within it. They post photographs, marvel at its emerald tail, celebrate it as a wonder of the cosmos. They do not know that the same light carries pulses, patterns, rhythms that may be the first whispers of an alien system watching us. And so we wait. Wait as the swarm grows thicker, as the pulses grow stronger, as Mars becomes wrapped in a net of companions shimmering with alien rhythm. Wait for a signal we may not understand, for a move we cannot predict. Wait for 3i Atlas to reveal whether it is a comet, a machine, a messenger, or something stranger still. Stay with me, because in part 4, we will confront the possibility that these signals are not only communication, but calibration, that the swarm is not just multiplying, but preparing, adjusting, and aiming itself for something that may soon change Mars, Earth, and everything in between. At first, the multiplication of objects around 3i Atlas was strange. Then it was unsettling. Then, as the swarm continued to grow and arrange itself, it became terrifying, because the more carefully astronomers tracked the companions, the clearer their behavior appeared. They weren't random. They weren't tumbling like debris or scattering like dust. They were moving into position. It was as though an invisible hand was arranging them, slotting each object into place with uncanny precision. Natural fragments don't do this. They break apart chaotically, scattering along the path of the comet. Some drift behind, some fly outward, some vanish entirely. But the companions of 3i Atlas didn't scatter. They aligned. They spread into orbits that looked deliberate, almost architectural. To the human eye, the swarm resembled scaffolding being built around a core, not a collapse, but a construction. Astronomers who studied the data noticed repeating patterns in the distances between the objects, ratios that suggested geometry, not chaos, triangular alignments, lattice-like arcs, and rings forming around the comet itself. If one object drifted slightly off, within days it corrected itself, returning to position. No natural force could explain this. No random jet of gas could place fragments back into a pattern. Something was guiding them, and then came the pulses. Not only were the objects multiplying, they were resonating, as though each one was adjusting itself in response to the others. When one companion brightened, others dimmed, as if in synchronization. When the main body of 3i Atlas outgassed, the swarm seemed to shift, absorbing the change and restoring balance. The entire system behaved not like a comet, but like a machine tuning itself, calibrating its parts until the whole was aligned. To those who saw the data, one thought became impossible to shake. This is preparation. But preparation for what? Some believed the swarm was preparing for observation, that as 3i Atlas approached Mars, the companions were positioning themselves to form a vast network of sensors, capable of monitoring the planet from every angle. If true, then Mars was about to become the most heavily studied world in the solar system, not by us, but by something far older, far stranger, Others believed it was more sinister, that the companions were weapons, small but powerful, positioning themselves for a coordinated strike. If each object carried even a fraction of destructive capability, then together they could devastate a planet, not by impact alone, but through coordinated action, electromagnetic pulses, directed energy, or technologies we cannot even name. To defense agencies, the word calibration took on a chilling new meaning: targeting. The data fed both theories. Some of the companions clustered close to Mars as though scanning it. Others spread outward into arcs as though encircling it. A few drifted farther still, settling into positions that, if extended, would one day align with Earth. Each night the pattern grew clearer, and each night the tension among those watching grew heavier. Imagine the scene on Mars itself. If you were standing on the red surface looking up, the sky would no longer hold a single comet. It would hold dozens, perhaps hundreds, each faintly glowing, each pulsing in rhythm with the others. Together they would form a lattice in the heavens, a halo around the planet, green and silent. From the surface, it would look like the sky itself was netted by alien fire, and though silent, it would feel alive. To the human mind, the most natural reaction is to assume threat, to assume that anything capable of such precision, such coordination, must have intent. And if it has intent, then it has purpose. The only question is whether that purpose is benign or hostile. But even the most optimistic observers struggled to find a comforting answer. Because even if the swarm was only observing, the act itself carried weight. Observation is not neutral. To be studied is to be known, and to be known is to be vulnerable. Defense planners were already running scenarios. If the swarm was preparing for something hostile, what could be done? The answer again and again was nothing. Humanity's weapons were designed for each other, not for alien constructs multiplying silently in orbit around another planet. Nuclear warheads could be launched, but what would they achieve? Destroy one companion and dozens remain. Strike the main body and fragments scatter, potentially creating more threats. And if the objects are not natural, if they are machines, then they may not even be harmed by blasts at all. Worse still, retaliation might only provoke them. And so the preparations on Earth took a different form. Not open defense, not declarations of war, but quiet desperation. Satellites were retasked to watch the swarm constantly. Communications protocols were updated in case signals were intercepted. Submarines with nuclear payloads were ordered into silent patrols, their crews not told the full reason why. Governments whispered among themselves, sharing data reluctantly, holding back what they feared to admit. The world above was entranced by a glowing comet. The world below was bracing for what might come with it. Scientists argued that the calibration might not be military at all. Some pointed to the geometric alignments and suggested they were harvesting energy, creating a vast solar array to capture sunlight. Others speculated that they were creating a communication net, a relay capable of sending signals across interstellar distances with perfect efficiency. If so, then the swarm might not be aimed at Mars or Earth, but outward, sending data back to wherever 3i Atlas had come from. If that was true, then the calibration was not targeting. It was reporting. Reporting us. The thought was chilling in its own way, because if 3i Atlas was transmitting, then whatever built it already knows we are here, already knows what we look like, what we emit, what we are. And if this was the report, then the question becomes, what will the response be? Each day the swarm grows larger. Each day its movements grow more refined, patterns emerge, then strengthen. To astronomers, it feels like watching a puzzle come together piece by piece, the final image still hidden, but the outline unmistakable. This is not random. This is not chance. This is structure. Something is being built beside Mars, and no one can say what it is. The world still gazes upward, unaware. Photographs of the green comet spread online. Poets write about its beauty. Children trace its glow with fingers pressed against glass. But hidden in that beauty is a swarm, multiplying, calibrating, preparing. A swarm that behaves not like fragments of a dying comet, but like the components of a system awakening. Stay with me, because in part 5, we will explore what comes after calibration, the possibilities of activation. What if the swarm is not just preparing, but priming itself for a moment when all of its pieces act at once? What happens then? To Mars, to Earth, to us? For weeks the swarm multiplied, then calibrated, arranging itself around 3i Atlas, with a precision that unsettled even the most cautious scientists. But if calibration was the first step, the question that haunted everyone was simple. What comes next? Machines do not align themselves for nothing. Systems do not synchronize without purpose. The companions of 3I Atlas were not drifting idly. They were preparing, and preparation suggests activation. The very idea was paralyzing, because activation could mean many things, and none of them were comforting. Perhaps it would mean communication. A grand broadcast beamed across the galaxy. The comet's swarm transformed into a vast antenna aimed outward. Perhaps it would mean observation on a scale beyond comprehension. The companions unfolding instruments we cannot even imagine, scanning Mars and Earth with impossible precision. Or perhaps it would mean something darker. Weapons systems arming, drones readying themselves, a structure designed not to watch but to act. The simulations offered no comfort. Defense analysts fed the orbital data into their models, projecting what the swarm might do if it were coordinated. The results were grim. If the companions activated simultaneously, they could reconfigure in seconds, shifting from passive orbits into attack vectors. Even if each object were no larger than a satellite, their combined mass could devastate Mars. A swarm strike on Earth could be catastrophic, and if they carried technologies more advanced than our own, then models were pointless. We would never see it coming. Astronomers began to notice subtler signs. Some companions glowed faintly brighter, then dimmer, as though their surfaces were changing. Others drifted closer to the main body, then returned to orbit, as if docking briefly before resuming position. A few broke from the swarm entirely, only to return days later, as though testing maneuvers. It was behavior that looked less like fragments and more like drones running drills. Every new observation deepened the sense of dread. The swarm was practicing. The swarm was getting ready. If activation was coming, what would trigger it? Some feared proximity to Mars. That once 3I Atlas settled into position beside the red planet, the swarm would come alive, unfolding its true purpose. Others suspected Earth. That the swarm was only calibrating now, waiting for the right alignment before turning toward us. A few whispered something even more unnerving, that the trigger had already happened. That the pulses we detected, the signals we may have intercepted, were not random but instructions, and activation was already underway. The thought spread through classified circles. What if we would not see activation as a sudden event, but as a slow reveal, unfolding piece by piece until it was too late to stop? What if activation had begun the moment the swarm multiplied, the moment fragments began taking their positions? Picture it, Mars orbit thick with green glowing companions, each one shifting slightly, pulsing faintly, like pieces of a machine waiting for the switch to be flipped. From Earth, it still looks like a comet, still beautiful, still harmless. But beneath the shimmer is order, rhythm, intent. And then one night the order tightens, the pulses synchronize, the swarm acts as one. Some argued that activation might not be hostile at all, that perhaps the swarm would unfold into a beacon, sending data across the stars, a message to others like it. But even this scenario carried a darker implication, because a beacon does not speak into silence. A beacon expects an answer, and if 3I Atlas was transmitting, then something out there might already be listening, waiting to respond. Others imagined an even stranger activation, terraforming. What if the swarm's purpose was not to destroy, but to reshape? Machines seeding Mars with chemicals, altering its atmosphere, preparing it for use. From our perspective, that might look no different from attack, and perhaps in a sense it would be, because a Mars remade for someone else is a Mars lost to us. The hardest truth for humanity to accept was that we might not recognize activation even if it happened before our eyes. We expect activation to look like a weapon firing, a light flaring, a sudden movement. But what if it is subtler? What if activation means a change in resonance, an adjustment in the swarm's rhythm, a shift invisible to the naked eye but monumental in consequence? We may already be living under an activated system and simply not understand it. Governments faced impossible choices. Should they act preemptively, risking war with something they could not defeat? Or should they wait, gambling that activation would not mean annihilation? Silence prevailed. Official statements spoke of beauty, of wonder, of the rare chance to witness an interstellar comet. Privately, leaders drafted emergency protocols, contingency plans that would be meaningless if the swarm chose to act. Humanity was reduced to waiting, staring upward, powerless. And the public, blissfully unaware of the danger, celebrated the spectacle. They gathered in parks and deserts, gazed at the emerald glow, shared photographs of the comet's growing tail. They did not know that hidden in that glow was a swarm that might be minutes, hours or days away from activation. They did not know that the beauty they admired might be the face of a machine preparing to reveal its true nature. The fear that spread among those in the know was not the fear of destruction alone. It was the fear of irrelevance. Because if the swarm activated, if it revealed itself to be something beyond our comprehension, then all of our debates, our defenses, our plans would mean nothing. We would not be players. We would be bystanders watching as forces beyond us reshape the fate of Mars, Earth, and the solar system itself. The green glow grows brighter each night. The swarm grows thicker. The rhythms grow sharper. Every sign points to one truth. Something is coming. And the only question left is whether we will survive to understand what it is. Stay with me, because in part 6, we will follow humanity's desperate preparations, the secret missions launched in silence, the weapons whispered about in classified halls, and the grim realization that none of it may be enough if 3i Atlas truly awakens. The emerald glow of 3i Atlas had already become a fixture in the night sky, in deserts and mountains, in crowded cities and quiet villages. People raised their eyes and saw a streak of beauty, a green torch burning above Mars, trailing its vast shimmering tail across constellations. To the public, it was a gift, a reminder that the universe is alive and mysterious. Parents lifted children to point at it. Poets and musicians found inspiration in its light. Social feeds overflowed with photographs and hashtags celebrating the comet of the century. But beauty was a mask. Because behind that glow, in data streams locked away in classified servers, in observatories where raw information never reached the public, the picture was very different. What astronomers saw was not beauty, but strategy. Not a comet, but a system. A system multiplying, calibrating, and perhaps preparing for something beyond human imagination. And what governments felt, as they studied the growing swarm around 3i Atlas, was not wonder. It was dread. The first stage of preparation was surveillance. Every agency capable of watching the heavens pivoted. Satellites once tasked with monitoring rival nations were retargeted toward Mars. High-powered radar arrays that normally scanned for ballistic missiles turned their gaze upward. Deep space antennas, spread across deserts and mountaintops, shifted their listening posts away from quasars and pulsars, tuning instead to the Emerald Visitor. Entire networks that had been built for human conflict suddenly united around a new adversary, an object from beyond the stars. Day after day, the swarm was tracked. Each companion was logged, its orbit calculated, its pulse recorded. Supercomputers devoured the numbers, running endless simulations, trying to predict what the swarm was building. The results only deepened the mystery. The objects weren't drifting randomly. They weren't scattering as fragments should. They were forming patterns, rings, arcs, and lattices that grew tighter each week. To the analysts staring at the simulations, the swarm looked less like a cloud of debris and more like scaffolding, as though something vast was being assembled beside Mars. Yet data alone was never enough. Watching confirmed the fear but did nothing to resolve it. So surveillance gave way to defense. In hidden rooms where lights burned long past midnight, the question shifted. What can humanity do if the swarm activates? The answers came hard and cold. Our weapons were designed for each other, not for machines multiplying in the silence of space. Nuclear missiles, precision-guided warheads, electromagnetic weapons. None had ever been tested against something like this. To strike at the swarm would be like throwing stones at a storm. Even if one companion could be destroyed, hundreds remained, and more appeared every week. And what if they weren't fragile at all? What if they were built to survive impact, built to endure? Striking first could mean nothing. Worse, it could mean provoking a response. Still, preparation continued, because to do nothing was unthinkable. Nations began to reposition assets quietly. Submarines armed with nuclear payloads slipped into new patrols. Their captains briefed in vague terms about potential, contingencies. Anti-satellite systems were activated under the cover of routine tests. Space. Agencies dusted off plans once dismissed as fantasies, kinetic impactors to nudge asteroids, high-powered orbital lasers, electromagnetic cannons. Projects that had lingered in blueprints for decades were suddenly given unlimited funding. Their development timelines compressed to months. The world had quietly entered a new kind of arms race, not against one another, but against the unknown. And yet, beneath the rush of activity, there was despair. Because even as humanity scrambled, Those closest to the data knew the truth. We were outmatched. Our rockets are slow, our weapons are crude, our defenses are fragile. Against 3i Atlas and its multiplying swarm, we are as children building sandcastles in the path of a rising tide. But even children will try. Rumors began to circulate of a secret mission, a spacecraft launched under the guise of a civilian satellite, but carrying a payload far more dangerous. Some whispered it was a probe designed to approach the swarm directly to test its reaction. Others claimed it carried a nuclear device, a desperate attempt at deterrence. No official ever confirmed the rumors, but the silence itself was telling. If the mission existed, it was already on its way, and no one outside a handful of rooms would ever know its fate. Beyond defense, another debate raged, quieter, but no less urgent. Should we speak? For decades, humanity has sent signals into space, radio waves, messages etched onto probes, greetings carried on golden records. But those were whispers cast into silence, hopeful attempts at reaching someone who might not exist. Now the situation was reversed. Something was here. Something was multiplying around Mars. Something that might already be listening. Should we risk communication? The camps split. One side argued for caution. Silence is safety. To announce ourselves is to invite danger. The other side argued the opposite. If 3i Atlas is intelligent, then it already knows we are here. It has seen our emissions, our satellites, our radar. To remain silent would appear fearful, or worse, hostile. To them, the only path forward was engagement. Send a message, open dialogue, prove ourselves willing to reach beyond fear. But what kind of message could bridge the gulf between worlds? Words are meaningless without shared understanding. Mathematics, perhaps. Pulses. Patterns. Something as simple as prime numbers broadcast on repeat. And yet, what if they interpreted even that as a challenge? What if communication was not a bridge, but a trigger? The thought froze the debate, leaving humanity paralyzed between silence and speech. While governments argued, the world below them reacted in its own ways. Religions took hold of the Emerald Comet, weaving it into prophecy and faith. Some declared it an omen of judgment, a warning written across the heavens. Others saw it as a blessing, a sign that humanity was not alone, that higher intelligence was watching over us. Sermons filled with fire and comfort spread across continents. Pilgrimages began to deserts and mountains, where people gathered under the glow of 3i Atlas, waiting for revelation. And then there were the cults. In hidden places, groups formed who saw in the swarm not fear, but destiny. To them, 3i Atlas was not a threat, but an ark, a vessel come to carry chosen ones into a new era. They claimed to hear meaning in the pulses, to feel presence in the green glow. Some began to prepare offerings. Others built transmitters of their own, crude devices aimed at the sky, broadcasting prayers and chants toward Mars. Their voices went unheard by the world, but perhaps not by the swarm. Inside the halls of power, mistrust deepened. Nations that should have been allies grew suspicious of one another. Who has data they are withholding? Who has already made contact? Who is building weapons not for defense but for control? Instead of unity, there was secrecy. Instead of cooperation, rivalry. Even in the face of something vast and incomprehensible, humanity's oldest habit, fear of one another, remained unbroken. And through it all, the swarm continued to grow. Each new companion slipped into orbit like a bead on a string. Each pulse sharpened, each alignment tightened. Mars became encircled in a halo of objects, green fire weaving a lattice that defied explanation. Astronomers stared at the patterns, and the longer they watched, the more it felt like watching a system come alive. Not a comet, not fragments, but machinery unfolding in the dark. The public still gazed upward with joy. Children sketched the green comet in classrooms. Lovers kissed beneath its glow. Artists painted it. Musicians composed symphonies for it. Humanity in the open embraced the spectacle. But in the shadows, leaders wrote emergency protocols. Scientists whispered of extinction. And generals wondered if the end might come not with warning, but with silence broken by activation. For those in the know, the fear was not destruction alone. It was irrelevance, that in the presence of something so vast, so advanced, humanity's choices meant nothing. That all our weapons, our debates, our beliefs were meaningless in the face of a swarm multiplying with impossible precision beside Mars. That we were not participants in this story, only spectators, waiting to see what role we would be assigned. Survivors, partners, or casualties. The glow of Three-Eye Atlas grows brighter each night. The swarm grows thicker. The rhythm sharpens. Every sign points to one truth. Something is coming. Whether it is message or fire, observation or conquest, no one can say. But everyone feels it. The waiting is the worst part. Waiting for the sky to change. Waiting for the swarm to act. Waiting to learn whether humanity's preparations, desperate and fragile, will matter at all. Stay with me, because in Part 7 we will look backward, into the shadows of history. Myths and records, carvings and stories may not be fantasy at all. They may be memory. Echoes of other nights when green lights multiplied in the sky and humanity was left staring upward, just as we are now. The present is terrifying enough. A swarm multiplying around Three-Eye Atlas, calibrating itself beside Mars, pulsing with rhythms that no comet should possess. Scientists track it, governments prepare for it, and the public admires it. But if we step back, if we turn away from our telescopes and our data streams, and instead look into the deep shadows of history, another possibility rises. One more unsettling than any weapon or machine. What if this is not the first time? Human memory is short. Civilizations rise, collapse, and bury their knowledge in ruins. But myths endure. Legends persist. Fragments of memory pass through generations, stripped of context but not of power. And across cultures, scattered across time, there are stories of lights in the sky, of glowing visitors, of multiplying stars that appeared and vanished without explanation. To most, these are fables, poetic metaphors for natural events. But now, with Three-Eye Atlas multiplying above Mars, the parallels demand attention. Consider the myths of ancient Mesopotamia. Carved into tablets thousands of years old are accounts of a green star that appeared suddenly, a light so bright it cast shadows at night. Priests recorded that the star was not alone, that smaller lights followed it, appearing one by one until the sky seemed filled with watchers. The event was seen as an omen, a warning from the gods. Rituals were performed. Fear spread. And then, just as suddenly, the lights vanished. Scholars dismiss the story as superstition, perhaps a comet or meteor shower magnified by imagination. But to those who study Three-Eye Atlas, the resemblance is chilling. A green visitor, multiplying companions, a sky filled with watchers, move forward in time, across oceans to Mesoamerica. Among the Mayan codices are depictions of serpents descending from the sky, their bodies lined with glowing scales. To the people who recorded them, they were divine beings, sky serpents weaving through the heavens. But to modern eyes, the imagery is uncanny. A comet's tail stretching across the sky, its swarm of companions like scales, each glowing faintly, each pulsing in rhythm. Was it myth or was it memory? In the Arctic, Inuit stories speak of green lights that move like hunters, appearing above the horizon in winters long past. The lights, elders said, would arrive silently, hover, then scatter before disappearing into the stars. Generations later, such tales were dismissed as auroras, the natural dance of solar particles in Earth's atmosphere. But auroras do not multiply. Auroras do not hold formation. Could those stories have been born of something else? Something that once passed near, just as Three-Eye Atlas now passes beside Mars. Even in Europe, records remain. Medieval chronicles describe nights when stars fell upward, clustering around a bright light that lingered in the sky for weeks. Artists painted strange arrays of orbs hovering above cities. Clerics declared them signs of heaven or omens of plague. Scientists centuries later dismissed them as comets, as misremembered eclipses, as exaggerations. But what if they were not? What if they were encounters? What if those ancient eyes were seeing the same phenomenon we see now, a swarm multiplying around a green visitor? It is not just myth. Even in recent history, anomalies haunt the records. Astronomers in the late 19th century reported comets that seemed to fragment, not chaotically, but with suspicious symmetry. Observers noted companions that lingered too long, moved too steadily. But without better instruments, the stories faded into obscurity, catalogued as curiosities. Today, with the swarm around Three-Eye Atlas, they look less like curiosities and more like warnings. And then there are the silences, ancient cultures that abruptly shifted their beliefs after celestial events. Civilizations that collapsed after recording omens in the sky, stone carvings left half-finished, temples abandoned, myths turning suddenly apocalyptic. Could it be coincidence? Of course. But if not, if those collapses followed encounters with something like the swarm, then we are repeating history now without knowing it. Imagine it. Our ancestors staring upward, just as we do now, watching a glowing visitor appear. watching companions multiply. They had no satellites, no telescopes, no simulations. They had only their eyes and their fear. To them, the swarm was divine or demonic. To us, it is technological. But the experience is the same. To see the sky fill with multiplying lights is to feel powerless, to wonder if the heavens are not just stars and comets, but presences watching us. The possibility that 3i Atlas is not unique but part of a cycle is perhaps the most terrifying of all. Because if this has happened before, then it will happen again. And if it has happened again and again across history, then perhaps the swarm is not here for us at all. Perhaps it follows its own rhythm, its own mission, unfolding every few centuries regardless of who watches from below. Perhaps we are incidental, witnesses to a cycle older than humanity, a pattern written across the solar system. This reframes the present in a new, darker light. If 3i Atlas is repeating a visitation our ancestors once endured, then why did they leave only myths behind? Why not records? Why not warnings clear enough to protect us? The answer may be that there was no survival to record, that the myths are the fragments of civilizations that did not endure the encounter, that what we dismiss as imagination is the echo of catastrophe. Scientists rarely admit such speculation publicly. To tie present data to ancient myth invites ridicule. Yet behind closed doors, the conversations are happening. Archaeologists and astronomers whisper to one another about correlations, about timelines, about cycles of comets, and the possibility that some were not natural at all. Patterns emerge, faint but suggestive. Perhaps every few hundred years a visitor passes. Perhaps every time it multiplies. And perhaps humanity is only now advanced enough to measure what our ancestors only feared. The thought chills like no weapon can, that we are not experiencing something new, but something ancient, that the green glow beside Mars is not discovery but recurrence, and if it is recurrence, then the outcome may already be written. The world looks up and sees beauty, but in the shadows of history are warnings, warnings we ignored, dismissed, buried beneath skepticism, warnings that speak of green lights multiplying, of watchers in the sky, of civilizations that trembled before visitors from beyond. Stay with me, because in Part 8, we will return to the present, to the moment when the swarm around 3i Atlas grows so dense, so synchronized, that even the public can no longer ignore it, when beauty gives way to fear and the truth begins to break through the mask. For months, the story was contained. Governments downplayed the data. Scientists spoke cautiously, careful not to inflame speculation. The public remained entranced by the beauty of a glowing comet, green and radiant above Mars. But silence can only last so long. Secrets fray under pressure. And as the swarm around 3i Atlas multiplied, the truth began to push its way into the open. It started with the amateur astronomers. Armed with backyard telescopes and restless curiosity, they began to notice what professionals had kept hidden. Night after night, photographs were uploaded to forums and feeds, and in them were not just the comet's brilliant head and tail, but faint points of light clustered around it. At first, others dismissed them as stars, lens flares, processing errors. But then the patterns repeated. Different telescopes, different observers, different nights. And still the companions appeared. The questions began to spread. What are those lights? The denials came quickly. Official accounts insisted the companions were dust fragments, nothing unusual, nothing to fear, but the explanations rang hollow. Too many images, too many repetitions, too much consistency. The internet began to buzz with conspiracy theories. Some claimed the swarm was an alien fleet, others that it was secret satellites launched by Earth's governments, others still that it was proof of a cover-up stretching back decades. What mattered was not which theory was believed, but that belief itself spread. The comet was no longer just a comet. As the swarm grew denser, the truth became harder to deny. What once required long exposures through sensitive equipment became visible to the naked eye. In the darkest skies, away from city lights, 3i Atlas no longer appeared solitary. Beside its emerald core shimmered faint points, clustered too closely, pulsing too steadily. Ordinary people, not scientists, began to see them, and once seen, they could not be unseen. The mood shifted. Wonder gave way to unease. Where once crowds gathered in joy to photograph the comet, whispers began to creep through those gatherings. People pointed not just at the green tail, but at the dim companions flanking it. Parents, who once lifted children to marvel at the sky, now pulled them closer, uncertain. The beauty of Three-Eye Atlas remained, but it was beauty laced with dread. News outlets struggled to keep control. Some leaned into skepticism, insisting the companions were illusions of optics, tricks of dust and atmosphere. Others embraced sensationalism, broadcasting theories of alien ships, invasion fleets, ancient prophecies fulfilled. The divide fractured the global conversation. For some, the comet remained a miracle. For others, it became the beginning of the end. Governments doubled down on silence. No official admission was given. But silence itself became suspicious. If nothing was wrong, why deny so much? Why refuse to release the full telescope data? Why classify reports that should have been public? The very act of denial became proof to many that something extraordinary was being hidden. And then came the night when denial collapsed. In cities far from lights, thousands of people gathered to watch the comet. And there, with nothing but their own eyes, they saw it. The swarm pulsing in rhythm, dozens of companions flaring and dimming together, a silent beat across the sky. It was not debris, it was not random, it was a system acting in unison, and now the whole world could see it. Panic followed. Markets shook. Religious movements declared prophecy fulfilled. Governments scrambled to maintain order, but order slipped. Fear does not wait for permission. Some fled to remote places, convinced the swarm would strike the cities first. Others built makeshift bunkers. Cults proclaimed the moment of contact was imminent and prepared for their ascension. The internet drowned in speculation, images, and rumors. For those who had long tracked the swarm, this moment was inevitable. But inevitability did not make it less terrifying, because now humanity was united not in secrecy, but in fear. Every eye turned upward. Every voice asked the same question. What are they doing? What comes next? And as if to answer, the swarm grew even more synchronized. The companions began shifting positions with a precision no one could dismiss. Rings tightened, arcs aligned. The pulses steadied into a rhythm so clear, so unmistakable, that even the skeptics fell silent. Whatever was happening around Three-Eye Atlas, it was not nature. It was not chance. It was purpose. Imagine standing on Earth under that sky. The comet glows above Mars, its emerald light shimmering like fire. Around it, dozens, perhaps hundreds of companions pulse in rhythm, their faint lights flickering as one. It is not chaotic. It is not debris. It is choreography, a dance written across the heavens. And every instinct in your body tells you what your mind does not want to admit. They are getting ready. This was the breaking point. No more myths, no more speculation, no more pretending. Humanity now knew, beyond denial, that something unnatural was unfolding above Mars, something alive with intent, something watching us as much as we watched it. The days that followed were some of the most tense in human history. Governments held emergency meetings. Militaries moved into high alert. Civil unrest grew as people demanded answers their leaders could not give. And through it all, the swarm continued its rhythm, silent, patient, unstoppable. Stay with me, because in Part 9, we will watch as humanity faces the unthinkable. The first movements of the swarm away from Mars, the first hints that their calibration is finished, and that whatever comes next will be directed not just at Mars, but at us. The night the swarm moved was the night everything changed. Until then, even as panic spread and secrecy collapsed, there was always the faint possibility of safety. Yes, the swarm multiplied. Yes, it pulsed. Yes, it aligned in ways that mocked natural law, but at least it stayed near Mars. At least it hovered there, distant, a spectacle confined to another world. As long as it remained beside Three-Eye Atlas, humanity could pretend it was only watching. That illusion ended when the first companions drifted outward. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. Observatories tracking the swarm noticed a handful of objects shifting, breaking formation. At first they assumed error. Instruments fail. Data glitches. But as hours passed, the pattern became undeniable. A cluster of companions was leaving orbit around the comet, not scattering, not drifting randomly. Moving together, the world woke to the news in fragments. Amateur astronomers posted images online showing faint lights trailing away from 3i Atlas. Forums exploded with speculation. Was this proof of alien ships? Were they heading toward Earth? Or was it just debris finally breaking free? The official silence made it worse. When governments refuse to explain what millions can now see, the vacuum fills with terror. By the next night, the truth was clear. Dozens of companions had detached from the main body and were traveling along new trajectories. Their paths were too steady to be chaos, too deliberate to be coincidence. They were leaving Mars' orbit. They were on the move. The effect on humanity was immediate. Markets plunged. Protests erupted. Some demanded open disclosure. Others demanded weapons. Still others demanded silence, convinced that even acknowledging the swarm would provoke it. In cities worldwide, people gathered outside, staring at the sky as though waiting for a sign, waiting for the moment when the faint lights would grow brighter, closer, undeniable. For those watching through instruments, the movements were even more chilling. The detached companions were not simply fleeing in random directions. They moved in arcs, some toward the outer solar system, others inward, as if spreading into a vast net. And then, as if to erase doubt, one cluster began to curve, a trajectory that, when projected forward, aligned not with empty space, but with Earth. The panic was unstoppable. News anchors trembled as they reported the possibility. Governments convened emergency councils. Militaries prepared in silence, though none admitted what they could do. To strike at the swarm would mean revealing weakness. To do nothing meant waiting for whatever came. Humanity, for all its noise and power, was reduced to paralysis. On Mars, robotic probes still orbiting the planet caught clearer glimpses than Earth could. Grainy but unmistakable footage showed companions moving like machines, surfaces glinting with unnatural regularity, pulses flashing in unison. To the untrained eye, the footage looked like lights drifting in the void. To those who studied it, it looked like a fleet deploying, and the comet itself, the great green torch of 3i Atlas, seemed almost diminished in the chaos. No longer the focus, no longer the marvel. It became the anchor, the base, the hive. The true story was no longer the comet, but the swarm it had birthed. The comet was only the host. The swarm was the presence, and now that presence was moving outward. Theories multiplied as fast as the companions. Were they scouts, spreading to map the solar system? Were they weapons, dividing into clusters to strike multiple targets? Were they seeds, meant to implant themselves into orbits and lie dormant until the right moment? Or were they something else entirely? A system unfolding in ways our imagination could not keep pace with. The thought that terrified even the boldest minds was that the swarm was not acting against us at all, that its trajectories were not hostile maneuvers, but indifferent ones, that it was deploying according to a mission written long before humanity existed. If that were true, then our terror was irrelevant. The swarm would not notice it. The swarm would simply continue, and we would live or die depending on whether its mission intersected with our existence. But indifference can kill as surely as intent. Imagine standing outside at night, gazing up at the comet, where once there was a single emerald blaze, now there is a halo, and from that halo faint streaks extend outward. To the naked eye, they are subtle, like new stars drifting from the sky. But once seen, the truth is unmistakable. They are moving, they are leaving, and some of them are heading here. This realization spread like fire. Religions declared judgment at hand. Cults rejoiced, proclaiming the swarm's movement the sign they had awaited. Scientists struggled to speak, their voices drowned by panic. And in the halls of power, desperation grew. Defense simulations ran day and night. Interceptors were readied, experimental weapons armed. Submarines slipped deeper into silence. But in every scenario, the result was the same. Even if humanity struck, the swarm was too large, too numerous, too precise. For every object destroyed, 100 more remained. The swarm was not something that could be fought. It was something to endure, or something to surrender to. And still the companions moved. Night after night, the arcs grew longer, the net spread wider, the pulse steadied. The swarm had calibrated. Now it was activating. And activation meant expansion. The comet is no longer just beside Mars. It is reaching outward, filling space with its companions, weaving the solar system into its design. Humanity, watching from below, trembles at the thought that we may already be part of that design. Stay with me, because in part 10, we will follow the first real confrontation, the moment when Earth dares to reach out directly to the swarm, sending signals and weapons, and learns whether 3i Atlas will answer with silence, with communication, or with fire. The swarm had spread too far to ignore. Companions broke free from 3i Atlas, drifting across the void with terrifying precision, some curving toward the outer planets, others inward toward Earth. The illusion of safety was gone. The emerald glow above Mars was no longer just a spectacle. It was a presence, active and deliberate. Humanity had reached the point of decision. Waiting was no longer enough. Silence was no longer possible. The debate had raged for weeks in hidden councils. Do we engage? Do we send signals, knowing that acknowledgement could draw the swarm's gaze? Do we fire weapons, knowing that even a single strike might provoke annihilation? Or do we remain passive, gambling that the swarm will drift past us without notice? Each choice carried its own terror. But the longer humanity waited, the closer the companions came. And so the decision was made. We would act. The first attempt was communication. Across the globe, deep space antennas turned toward 3i Atlas and its growing cloud. Messages were crafted with painstaking care. Not words, but mathematics, prime numbers, geometric sequences, pulses of radio waves that could not be mistaken for natural noise. The transmissions were beamed outward, directed at the swarm, carrying humanity's first deliberate greeting. The world held its breath. Hours passed, then days. At first silence, but then, buried in the background of the comet's glow, a change appeared. Not words, not language, but rhythm. The pulses of the companions shifted, aligning faintly with the prime sequences we had sent. To the skeptics, it was coincidence. To the believers, it was acknowledgement. For the first time, the swarm had answered. The response was debated endlessly. Was it communication or calibration, recognition or mimicry? No one could agree, but for those who listened closely, the meaning was secondary to the fact itself. The swarm had heard us, it had noticed, and now it was responding. The second attempt was more dangerous. A probe, launched in silence months earlier under the guise of a communications satellite, had reached the outer edge of Mars' orbit. Its true mission was simple: approach one of the detached companions, record its structure, and transmit everything back before being destroyed. For weeks, the probe had coasted quietly, unnoticed by the public, its operators working in secrecy. Now it entered the swarm. What it saw remains classified, but leaks began almost immediately. Grainy images shared in whispers showed something no one had expected: geometry. The companion was no fragment of ice or rock. It was angular, metallic, glinting with surfaces too regular to be natural. Along its hull ran glowing seams, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the others. And as the probe drew closer, the pulses changed. The last transmission was a flood of static. The probe vanished, as if erased. Officially, the mission never existed. But the images, circulating in secret, were undeniable. The companions were machines. Panic erupted in the corridors of power. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. The swarm was artificial. The comet was a hive. And the companions were not fragments, but constructs. The debate shifted again. If communication had brought acknowledgement, and probes had brought erasure, what would weapons bring? Some argued for restraint. To fire would be suicide, an act of hostility against a system far beyond our power. Others argued that to remain passive was to invite death, to allow the swarm to act first. And so the third attempt was made. Not communication, not observation, but confrontation. The weapon was experimental, a satellite repurposed into a kinetic interceptor, designed to strike at one of the detached companions with pure velocity. The launch was kept secret, its trajectory hidden. For days it coasted in silence, guided by signals whispered through secure channels. And then, without warning, it struck. The impact should have shattered any natural fragment. But the companion did not shatter. It flared. For one blinding instant, its glow surged brighter than the comet itself, pulsing outward like a shockwave. Instruments across Earth recorded the event. Amateur astronomers saw the flare with their own eyes. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The companion remained, untouched, unbroken, unchanged. The only difference was the swarm itself. Its rhythm shifted. The pulses aligned tighter, steadier, as though the entire network had noticed. For the first time, the swarm moved in unison. Arcs tightening, rings forming, companions drawing closer to one another. Not chaos, not debris, Response. The world erupted in fear. Had we provoked them? Had the strike been noticed as an attack? Or had it simply confirmed what the swarm already knew? That we were watching, testing, probing, afraid? Whatever the answer, the result was the same. The swarm had shifted. Humanity had made contact not with words but with aggression. And now the sky itself felt hostile. Imagine standing under that sky. The comet glowing green above Mars, its swarm shimmering like a lattice of fire. And then, across that lattice, a wave of synchronized pulses, rippling outward like a silent heartbeat. Not random, not natural, response. A message written not in words, but in light. We see you. For the public, the realization spread like wildfire. Governments could no longer contain the truth. Amateur astronomers had the data. The flare had been seen worldwide. Denials collapsed. Official silence broke. Humanity now knew, beyond speculation, beyond myth, that the swarm was alive with intent. The first confrontation had come, and though no weapon had succeeded, the result was worse. For now, humanity waited not just for the swarm to act, but for the price of our action to be revealed. Stay with me, because in part 11 the swarm answers more clearly. Not with destruction, not yet, but with a display so vast, so impossible, that even the last skeptics fall silent. A display that proves beyond doubt that 3i Atlas is not just visiting our solar system, it is rewriting it. For weeks humanity waited, holding its breath, haunted by the silence of the swarm after our first strike. We had spoken with mathematics, received a rhythm in reply. We had sent a probe and it had vanished. We had launched a weapon and it had been erased by indifference. The swarm had not retaliated, not yet, but its rhythm had changed. Its formation had shifted, and that silence, that patience, was more terrifying than any act of war. Then, one night, the waiting ended. It began with light. Astronomers tracking 3i Atlas noticed the companions brightening. Not one or two, not a random flicker, but dozens at once. Their pulses grew sharper, faster, aligning into patterns no one could mistake for chance. Rings of companions lit in sequence, arcs flaring like circuitry in the void. Across the sky, the swarm came alive, a lattice of green fire above Mars. The public saw it first as beauty. Millions watched online streams of the comet suddenly blazing with new intensity. Social feeds exploded with awe, but awe gave way to unease when the patterns repeated. Rings igniting, then dimming, then igniting again. Waves of light racing across the swarm like signals running through a machine. It was not chaos. It was not accident. It was a display. To scientists, the meaning was clear. This was a demonstration of power, not a weapon fired, not an attack launched, but a message written in the only universal language. Order. The swarm was showing us what it could do, that it could move in unison, that it could control light, energy, resonance, that it was not fragments, not debris, not a comet breaking apart. It was a system, a machine so vast it used a planet as backdrop for its performance. The spectacle grew. For hours, the swarm pulsed in sequences, each cycle more elaborate than the last. Triangles formed, then spirals, then grids stretching across the heavens. At one point, the companions aligned into a line that spanned the comet's entire tail, each glowing like a bead on a cosmic string, a line so straight it defied the randomness of nature. At another, the swarm shifted into rings stacked atop one another, a cylinder of light rising above Mars, as though the planet itself had been crowned by alien fire. The effect on Earth was shattering. In cities, crowds poured into the streets, staring upward in silence. Religions declared revelation, prophecy fulfilled before human eyes. Governments scrambled, issuing contradictory statements, some insisting the event was natural, others admitting it was not. But no words could undo what billions had witnessed. 3. Atlas was alive with intent. And then, as if to strip away all doubt, the swarm did something no comet, no natural object could ever do. It reached out. For a brief, staggering moment, the pulses synchronized with signals on Earth. Not random signals, not noise, but our own broadcasts. Radio frequencies reflected back in rhythm. Television carriers echoed in faint modulation. It was as if the swarm had been listening all along, collecting our transmissions, and now it chose to mirror them. Songs, voices, data, all distorted, all faint, but undeniably ours, came shimmering back from the sky. Humanity heard itself reflected by something that was not human. The meaning was debated instantly. Was it communication, an attempt to speak in our own language? Was it mockery, a mirror held up to show us how exposed we are? Or was it warning, a reminder that nothing we send into the void goes unheard? Whatever the interpretation, the truth was clear. The swarm was not silent. It was answering. The fear grew unbearable, because if the swarm could hear us and if it could reflect us, then it already knew us. Every broadcast, every signal, every message we had ever sent into the sky, radio, television, radar, satellite chatter, all of it had been gathered, processed, understood. Our secrets, our wars, our dreams, our mistakes, our civilization's entire echo, caught in the net of 3i Atlas. And now it was playing them back, not as kindness, not as comfort, but as proof. Proof that it sees us. Proof that it knows us. Imagine standing in a city square that night, surrounded by thousands of others, watching the green glow above Mars shimmer with impossible geometry, listening on your phone or radio as faint echoes of human voices return from the sky. Not from satellites, not from Earth, from the swarm, from machines multiplying in orbit around a comet that should not exist. The sound of our own civilization, returned to us by something watching from beyond. The psychological effect was profound. Some wept, declaring it proof that we were not alone, that intelligence beyond Earth had finally spoken. Others fell into despair, convinced the mirror was only a prelude to destruction, that the swarm was mocking us before erasing us. And many simply stared, silent, unable to process the enormity of the moment. For the first time, humanity was united, not by choice, not by design, but by awe and fear before something too vast to ignore. And still the display continued. For 3 nights the swarm blazed above Mars, lighting the planet in emerald fire, pulsing with rhythms too precise for chance, reflecting fragments of us back to ourselves. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The lights dimmed, the pulses faded. The swarm returned to silence, drifting once more in its formation, patient, inscrutable. The world was left with questions no one could answer. Why now? Why show us this? Why reveal power so immense yet stop short of destruction? Was it warning? Was it invitation? Or was it simply the next step in a process that had begun long before we looked up? But beneath every question lay a single truth. The swarm was no longer speculation, no longer myth, no longer hidden in classified data or whispered in secrecy. It had revealed itself to all of humanity, openly, undeniably. 3 Atlas was not a comet. It was a presence, a system vast enough to reshape the sky, deliberate enough to echo our own voices back to us. And now, with silence resumed, we were left to wonder whether the display had been the beginning or the end. Stay with me, because in part 12, we will face the final chapter, the culmination of the swarm's purpose. When the companions align one last time, when the rhythm becomes undeniable, and when 3i Atlas makes the move that will decide whether humanity enters a new age or vanishes into silence forever. For 3 nights the swarm blazed above Mars, weaving light across the heavens, echoing our own voices back to us, showing power beyond imagination. And then it fell silent again. But silence was not peace. Silence was waiting, and in that waiting, humanity felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The swarm was not finished. The display had not been an end. It had been a prelude. The first signs came in the shifting of the companions. Astronomers noticed the arcs tightening, the rings drawing closer together. Patterns that had once spread wide across Mars' orbit now folded inward, aligning into new shapes. Triangles, spirals, grids, all of them collapsing into one final form. It was as though the swarm had been rehearsing, practicing, and now the performance was reaching its climax. To the naked eye, the comet still shone with beauty, but through telescopes the sight was terrifying. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of companions moving as one, their pulses sinking into a single rhythm, a heartbeat written across the sky, a machine gathering itself for its true purpose. The debate ended then. Skeptics had no arguments left. Believers had no comfort left. There was only the truth, undeniable and merciless. 3i Atlas was not a comet. It was a construct, a presence, a system alive with intent, and now, at last, it was preparing to act. Theories exploded. Some said the swarm was building a weapon, a structure that would unleash its power on Mars, on Earth, on both. Others argued it was a transmitter, a beacon about to send a message across the stars, announcing that we had been found. A few whispered something stranger still, that the swarm was not sending a message, but opening a door, creating a passageway for something else to arrive. But speculation meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was what we could see, and what we saw was impossible to mistake. The companions were aligning, folding themselves into a single vast geometry that filled Mars' orbit like a crown, a lattice of green fire encircling the red planet, pulsing brighter with each passing night. The world descended into chaos. Cities erupted in panic. Markets collapsed beyond recovery. Religious movements declared apocalypse or ascension. Governments declared emergencies, some deploying weapons into orbit, others retreating into bunkers. Cults gathered in deserts and mountains, raising their arms to the sky, waiting for deliverance. The entire species stared upward, powerless, as the heavens themselves transformed. And then, one night, the rhythm changed. The pulses, once scattered, once layered in complex sequences, merged into one, a single beat, steady and deafening in its silence. Across the swarm, every companion flared and dimmed together, a wave of light sweeping across Mars like a heartbeat visible from Earth. Once, twice, 3 times, each pulse brighter, sharper, more synchronized, until the whole planet seemed wrapped in emerald fire. The effect was overwhelming. Instruments on Earth overloaded. Satellites failed. Radios filled with static carrying fragments of our own voices, distorted beyond recognition. Power grids flickered. The very air seemed to hum with resonance, as though the swarm's rhythm had reached into our world, vibrating every circuit, every signal, every nerve. And then came the culmination. The swarm, blazing brighter than ever, shifted one last time, folding its lattice into a single colossal structure, a ring spanning Mars' orbit, glowing like a crown of light. From Earth, it was visible even to the naked eye, a halo around the red planet, vast and unnatural, a machine the size of a world, burning emerald in the night. What it was, no one could say. A weapon, a transmitter, a gate, a monument, it did not matter. What mattered was the scale. For the first time in human history, we witnessed not the arrival of a visitor, but the rewriting of a planet's sky. Mars had been claimed, not by us, not by nature, but by 3i Atlas. And then, silence again. The swarm held its form, the ring glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm too slow to measure. Whatever it had built, it was complete, and humanity could only watch, helpless, wondering what it meant. Was it finished? Its purpose fulfilled? Or was this only the beginning? Would the ring turn outward, toward Earth? Would it unleash energy we cannot withstand? Would it open to reveal something waiting beyond? No one knew. No one could know. But the message was clear. 3i Atlas had come not to pass through, not to drift by, not to fade into the distance. It had come to build, to seed, to claim. And now, beside Mars, it had done so. Imagine standing outside that night, looking up at the sky. Mars glowing red as always, but now crowned with a ring of green fire, vast and unbroken, a lattice stretching across the heavens. The comet blazing at its heart, its tail shimmering like a torch, its companions no longer separate, but joined into a single machine. The sight would sear itself into memory. The knowledge would burrow into every mind. We are not alone, and we are not in control. The world is left with silence, with fear, with awe. No answers, only questions. What has been built? What will it do? When will it act? And above all, why now? Why here? Why us? Perhaps the swarm will never answer. Perhaps its rhythm will fade, and it will drift away, leaving behind only a crown around Mars, a monument to a purpose we will never understand. Or perhaps this is only the first act, and the next will come without warning, without mercy, without hope. Either way, one truth has become inescapable. Humanity has witnessed the impossible. We have seen the sky remade. We have seen a comet reveal itself as a system, a swarm, a presence older and greater than anything we imagined. We have seen Mars claimed by 3i Atlas. And now, all we can do is wait. Wait to see if the ring will turn toward us. Wait to see if the silence will break again. Wait to see if we are survivors, partners, or casualties in a story not of our making. The green glow lingers. The ring burns above Mars. And the question that has haunted us since the first companion appeared remains unanswered. What does 3i Atlas want? Stay with me. Because though this story ends here, the silence above Mars is not the end. It is only the beginning.